A snake slithered its way toward the baby inside the house. The innocent infant stretched out a hand upon seeing it, while the snake coiled into an attacking stance. In the nick of time, Roy drew the revolver hanging on the wall behind him. The gunshot startled people both inside and outside the house. A peasant woman rushed in, sweeping the unharmed baby into her arms, while Grandma Ivy picked up the snake, which had been split into 2 pieces on the ground. Witnessing the mysterious man's remarkable skill, Alice grew even more curious about his identity. A few nights earlier, Roy, badly wounded, slumped over a horse, halting outside the courtyard of a farmer's house. Alice, the mistress of the house, stepped outside holding a gun and issued a warning. No sooner had Roy lifted his head than a bullet struck him, sending him crashing to the ground. Fortunately, the bullet only grazed his throat and did not prove fatal. Alice stepped forward to examine his injuries closely. After confirming he posed no threat, she carried the stranger into the barn. Ivy spent the whole night cleaning his wound with homemade remedies. Under their careful care, Roy's condition improved, but he remained weak. The wound in his throat left him unable to speak, and Alice still had no idea of his name or identity. One night, when Alice went to the barn to check on Roy, she accidentally spotted the letter he carried with him, from the signature on the envelope. Alice learned his name was Roy, but his identity remained a mystery. As Roy gradually regained his strength, he grew interested in the herd of horses in the courtyard and went into the stable alone to train them. Watching the once frantic horses calm down and fall into perfect order, Alice's family realized this man was no ordinary person. Truckee, a young boy, was very friendly to Roy and invited him to join the family for a meal. Just then, an unexpected visitor arrived at the courtyard. Alice immediately grabbed her gun and went outside to stand guard. The visitor turned out to be a desperate mother, her child covered in a red rash and crying uncontrollably. Since there was no doctor in town, she had traveled to the outskirts to seek help from Alice's grandmother, Ivy. Seeing the weeping baby and the helpless mother, Alice decided to lend a hand. Ivy carried the baby into the house and turned to prepare herbal medicine. At that moment, a snake slithered toward the baby inside. Roy drew the revolver hanging on the wall behind him. The gunshots startled everyone inside and outside the house. Witnessing the mysterious man's impressive skill, Alice became even more curious about his identity. Roy said nothing. He walked outside to repair the stable fence, his throat wound having improved slightly. He announced he would leave the next day, then asked Alice why she and her grandmother and son lived in such a remote place. Alice did not explain in detail. She only mentioned that she had lost 2 husbands. In the afternoon, Sheriff Bill came to visit Alice. Bill had lost his wife, and Alice her husband's. The two had feelings for each other but had never voiced them. The townsfolk wanted to buy a few of Alice's horses, but due to tense relations between the two sides, they had asked Bill to act as an intermediary. Bill explained his purpose for coming to buy the horses and also told her about the brutal acts of an outlaw gang in the northern border towns. He informed Alice that there was an outlaw named Roy who had fallen out with his gang leader over money, and the gang was now hunting him down. Hearing that Roy was linked to outlaws, Alice was shocked. She invited Bill inside to talk further. Roy caught sight of the sheriff's badge on Bill's chest and realized his identity. He took the initiative to go inside and turn himself into Bill. Bill was skeptical of Roy's identity. This man did not look like a desperate fugitive. After asking a few simple questions, he took Roy back to town. Meanwhile, Frank, an outlaw with a missing arm, led his gang in a frantic pursuit along the road, vowing to personally capture the traitor Roy. This town was truly a town of widows. 83 adult men in the town had died in a mining accident, leaving only elderly people and the widows and children they had left behind. A dinner party was being held in the town, where representatives from Mercury Mining in the town were discussing plans to restart mining operations. In the 2 years since the town had lost its labor force in the mine, Labelle town, the town's name had been left without a source of income. To help the town get rid of its predicament, the mayor proposed partnering with Mercury Mining to build a mine, with profits split 50-50. However, Mercury Mining demanded 90% of the profits. To sway the townsfolk, they offered generous terms. They would bring nearly 100 male workers to the town and rebuild the wooden house town with iron and bricks. Male labor was an extremely scarce resource in this town of widows. Several female representatives were tempted, but Mary insisted on opposing the deal. "We lost our husbands and a few horses," she argued, "but we're still here, our children are still here, and the silver is still here, and that silver will always be ours. That means we still have a choice." With the supporters and opponents deadlocked, the Mercury Mining representative resorted to a tactic of feigning withdrawal. He pretended to leave, then dropped a $20,000 check. he suggested the town representatives vote on whether to take the money and workers, or reject the terms and continue living in hardship. In the end, the vote passed by a narrow margin. Labelle town compromised with mercury mining. This left Mary deeply disappointed. On the other side, Sheriff Bill locked Roy in the town's office and deliberately concealed Roy's identity from others, fearing that if word got out, the outlaw gang would target the town. Inside the office, Roy listened as Deputy Whitey told him about Alice's past. After her first husband died in a flood, Alice had disappeared. A few years later, she returned to the town with a new family, only to find that her ex-husband's farm had been seized by another man. Sheriff Bill had stepped in to negotiate on Alice's behalf, but they were ambushed. During the gunfight, Bill had killed the man's 3 sons and helped Alice get her farm back. Later, Alice's second husband was retaliated against. He was shot in the back and killed on the street, and no one knew who was responsible. 2 weeks later, his ex-wife, referring to the man who seized the farm, died unexpectedly from rheumatic fever. Since then, townsfolk had spread rumors that Alice and her indigenous grandmother Ivy had cast a poison curse in revenge, and that was why Alice's family had been ostracized. That night, troublemakers arrived in town. 2 hoodlums rode horses down the street, firing their guns wildly. Sheriff Bill went out to stop them but tripped over nothing, drawing jeers from the men. Deputy Whitey arrived just in time, brandishing 2 revolvers. He scared the hoodlums off. With the townsfolk watching, Bill was humiliated. He returned to the police station to drown his sorrows in alcohol. Since losing his wife, his eyesight had deteriorated sharply, severely impairing his ability to fight. He had tried every remedy, but nothing worked. The contrast between his once heroic self and his current cowardly state was more than he could bear. Gone was the tough guy, and in his place stood someone the townsfolk labeled a coward, determined to prove himself. Bill planned to team up with Marshal John to capture Frank. Early the next morning, he left his children in the care of his sister Mary, said goodbye to everyone, and left town. On the wall, a wanted poster for the fugitive Roy was being put up, offering a $500 reward, dead or alive. Sister Lucy had once seen Roy. After reading the news in the newspaper, she took the initiative to go to the newspaper office and provide clues to the editor. In her eyes, Roy was a godless devil, but in the newspaper, Roy was portrayed as a bandit with a conscience, someone who had stood up for justice to stop Frank's robberies. Frank was furious when he read the news. He decided to pay the editor a visit, to convince them to print the truth. Dozens of burly men sat in the newspaper office's living room, their presence exuding menace without a word. Frank did not resort to violence. He knew full well that public opinion was a force he could exploit. Instead, he threatened the editor to write another article about Roy. "I want you to write this. Roy, this so-called good guy, betrayed me. Anyone who shelters a man, woman, or child will be killed by me." At that time, Roy was in jail in Labelle town. Only Sheriff Bill and Alice, who lived outside town, knew his true identity. After Bill left, Alice went to town with a gun and threatened Deputy Whitey to release Roy. The 2 men were bewildered, unsure of Alice's motives, but under threat, they had no choice but to comply. Alice's reasoning was simple. There was no one in her family, herself, her grandmother, and her son, who knew how to train horses. She needed someone to help. While Roy was rumored to be a dangerous fugitive, Alice had seen enough during their time together to believe he was not as cold-blooded as the stories made him out to be. She asked Roy to help her train the horses. In return, she would give him a horse's payment to help him reach Texas, the place listed on the envelope of his letter. Roy agreed, but he also made a request. He wanted Alice to teach him to read. It turned out Roy was illiterate, and that was one of the reasons he had never opened the letter he carried with him. Meanwhile, Frank's gang raided a camp of Norwegian travelers. The gang and the Norwegian family sat around a campfire. Frank held someone else's child in his arms and rambled on about his own tragic past. The poor Norwegians, surrounded by the gang's thugs, listened nervously to Frank's long-winded monologue. As night fell, Frank offered to stay the night at the camp, revealing his true nature by demanding that the 2 men's wives stay with him. Sheriff Bill, who was chasing Frank, stopped at a diner to rest and happened to meet a merchant. There, Bill bought a pair of glasses, and during their conversation, he learned the general direction the outlaw gang had taken. Before leaving, he sent a telegram to Marshal John, arranging to meet him in Orange Town. He also told John that Roy had been apprehended and was being held in Labelle town. As expected, Bill found the bodies of several outlaws near a canyon. He arrived there following the clues, and just as Roy had described, a fierce gunfight had taken place between Roy and the gang. Using the traces at the scene, Bill replayed the shootout in his mind. During the chase, the gang had shot Roy, forcing him to let go of the horse carrying the stolen money. After a long, grueling pursuit, Roy's horse was already exhausted. Realizing the horse could not go on, Roy had shot it to end its suffering. He then fell to the ground, using the horse's corpse as cover to fire back at the gang. With a rifle and a revolver, Roy had killed 7 outlaws in less than a minute. But this was not enough to stop the gang. More men came charging in. Roy decided to capture the leader to defeat the army. He picked up the rifle and aimed at Frank. After a moment's hesitation, he pulled the trigger, wounding Frank's left arm. The gang leader, Frank, was seriously injured and bleeding heavily. The gang's morale plummeted, and they retreated to treat Frank's wound. This allowed Roy to escape, but the shootout became the trigger for the gang's brutal massacre of Creed Town. Sheriff Bill continued his pursuit of Frank. Following the gang's trail, he came across the group of Norwegian travelers. This family had interacted with the gang, and the humiliation Frank had inflicted on them the previous night was still fresh in their minds. Bill learned from them that Frank was heading to Orangetown, the very place Bill had agreed to meet Marshal John in his telegram. He sensed that a major battle was about to erupt. On the other side, Marshal John sought out the Mercury mining agent. He demanded that Mercury Mining step up security in Labelle town, as most of the town's residents were women and there were few law enforcement officers, leaving it vulnerable to outlaw attacks. The agent had already hired a security team, so he paid little attention to John's warning. Logan, the security team leader, was overconfident, believing he could handle Frank. As John was about to leave, someone handed him Bill's telegram and held out a hand asking for a tip. John ignored the request. After reading the note, he stuffed it into the man's hand and hurried to Orangetown. The editor, standing at the door, happened to see this. He called the man over and read the contents of the telegram. Back in Labelle town, Deputy Whitey, who had been locked in the jail cell, was rescued by Mary. They all went to confront her. The two sides finally struck a deal. The townsfolk would buy Alice's herd of horses at a low price in exchange for Roy's release. To the townsfolk, Roy was just an ordinary criminal, so no one paid him much attention. After that, Roy continued to stay at the farm. During the day, he trained the horses. At night, he learned to read and write. In his spare time, he taught Truckee how to ride horses and herd livestock. As an indigenous boy, Truckee didn't know how to ride a horse, a total joke in the American West. His father had died young, so no one had taught him how to become a proper indigenous man. Watching Truckee's riding skills improve day by day under Roy's guidance, both Alice and Ivy were filled with joy. Before long, Logan arrived in Labelle town with his security team, declaring himself the new sheriff. The number of adult men in the town was growing, and the residents were overjoyed. But while some rejoiced, others worried. Mary and Whitey were both dissatisfied, yet they were powerless to oppose Logan, as they were under his control. That night in Orangetown, John stopped at a saloon to rest. The saloon was pitch black, and the bartender's hands trembled uncontrollably. Sensing something was wrong, John asked, "Where is everyone?" The bartender replied that he didn't know either, but this casual response accidentally gave away John's identity. At that moment, a candle was suddenly lit in the corner of the saloon. Behind John, Frank and his gang had been hiding in the dark, waiting for him. Gunshots rang out, and the legend of the Western Marshal came to an end. Inside a small house, countless patients with smallpox lay bedridden. Frank, known for his ruthless ways, pushed open the door, and the tragic scene shocked him. Only a young girl was left to care for the patients, and it was clear she couldn't hold on much longer. Mistaking the white-bearded man in front of her for a priest, the girl begged him to pray for the patients before leaving. Frank replied, "I'm not going anywhere." Frank's gang members suggested burning down the house to completely contain the sick, but for once, Frank showed a glimmer of kindness. He told the gang to set up camp by the river to rest, while he stayed in the house to help the girl take care of the patients. Frank's gentle treatment of the sick was hard to reconcile with the fact that he had once massacred an entire town. The next morning, Frank left with his gang, leaving behind a tidy house and neat graves lined up behind it. In his eyes, this was the best end for smallpox patients. Sheriff Bill had been tailing the gang all along, planning to team up with Marshal John in Orangetown to capture Frank. But when he arrived in the town, all he found was John's body. The town's military unit was out on a mission, and the local law enforcement had no ability to fight the gang, so they let the outlaws enter the town, kill John, and leave unhindered. Hearing about the law enforcement's cowardice, Bill was furious at their incompetence. He secretly swore to avenge John. He left the town and continued to follow the gang's trail. By a river, Bill came face to face with the gang, who were also stopping there to rest. He finally saw Frank, the gang leader he had been longing to capture, but he hesitated. The gang was too numerous. Bill covered the sheriff's badge on his chest and lied, saying he was just a passerby. But this deception didn't fool the outlaws. Under Frank's threat with a gun, Bill admitted his true identity. Unlike Marshal John, Bill posed no threat to the gang. Frank put away his gun and led the gang past Bill. In that moment, Bill finally understood the helplessness of Orange Town's law enforcement, facing a brutal gang. One person could do nothing, so Bill went to a nearby military camp and begged the soldiers to help. But the major was tied up with a mission and couldn't leave. He told Bill, "The gang has done too many evil deeds, heaven will punish them eventually." Bill was completely stuck. He had initially chased Frank to prove himself, but now he was outnumbered and couldn't capture the gang. He was too ashamed to go back, falling into a deep dilemma. On the other side, the newspaper editor arrived in Labelle town. From the telegram, he had learned that the town sheriff, Bill, had arrested Roy, so he took out Roy's wanted poster and asked the patrons in the saloon about him. Bill had deliberately hidden Roy's identity, so no one in the town knew about the arrest. Deputy Whitey, who was standing nearby, had talked to Roy in jail before. Even though Roy barely looked like the portrait on the wanted poster, Whitey still guessed his true identity. The editor didn't get the clue he wanted, but he learned another story about Labelle town. An old man in the saloon told him that a mining accident had once claimed the lives of 83 men in the town. As a news editor, he keenly sensed this would be a big story and that the town might hold more secrets, so he decided to stay in Labelle town to investigate further. Not long after, Deputy Whitey ran into Roy by chance. He warned Roy, "There's a reporter in town holding a wanted poster and asking about you. You need to be more careful from now on." Many people in the town had already seen Roy's face. As the wanted poster circulated, someone would eventually suspect his identity. Roy knew it was time for him to leave. After finishing all his work training the horses and unclogging the well, he said goodbye to Alice. He told her he would leave after delivering the trained horses to Labelle town. When Roy arrived in town to deliver the horses, he caught the newspaper editor's attention. Through the residents' gossip, the editor learned about Roy's deeds and grew suspicious of his identity. Soon after, the editor rushed back to his newspaper office and published an article titled "The Secret of Labelle Town." The gang, which had been tracking Roy's whereabouts, saw the newspaper. In the article, the editor had exaggerated his experiences in Labelle town and directly stated that Roy was hiding in the town. This gave Frank a new target. He had once vowed to kill anyone who sheltered Roy, and now it was time to keep that promise. The gang gathered their men and marched toward Labelle town in a mighty procession. By this time, Roy had already left the town. On one hand, he feared his identity being exposed would bring disaster to the residents. On the other hand, he had finally opened the letter he had been carrying with him. After learning to read and write at Alice's house for days, Roy could now understand the letter's contents. In the letter, his older brother Jim apologized to Roy for his failure to take responsibility and left his address at the end, inviting Roy to come live with him. For years, Roy had believed Jim had abandoned him, but after reading the letter, he realized it had all been a misunderstanding. Roy finally let go of his resentment and rode off on his horse. The representatives of Labelle town also saw the article in the newspaper. Only then did they realize that the horse trainer at Alice's farm was the famous fugitive Roy. They immediately went to the farm outside town to find him, but only learned that he had already left. The representatives knew well that explaining to the gang would be useless. The town was about to face a massacre. They needed to come up with a plan. Logan claimed he would gather more men to fight Frank and left first with his security team. The townsfolk were skeptical of his words. Mary suggested that the residents move outside the town to take shelter temporarily and advised Alice to leave with the group. But Alice refused. Her son Truckee was missing, and she had to find him. The representatives returned to the town to organize the residents' evacuation, only to discover that all the horses in the stable had been stolen. Mary realized the security team was behind this. Their goal was to keep the residents in town to prevent any losses to the mining business. The last escape route was cut off. Labelle town had no choice but to fight to the death. Mary asked the residents to hand over their household weapons, then assigned positions to everyone to ambush the gang. Whitey went to the nearby Black Village for help. Its residents had all fought in wars and were skilled in combat, but no one paid him any attention. This left him deeply discouraged. On the other side, Roy rode to a cemetery, the place where his father was buried. During his previous escape, he had hidden all his gear in his father's tomb, and now it was time to retrieve it. That night, the security team set up camp on the outskirts. A stranger emerged from the darkness. It was Roy. He recognized that the herd of horses by the camp was from Labelle town and had come to investigate. Roy planned to send the horses back to the town, but Logan, the security team leader, stopped him. Facing Logan's reckless provocation, Roy drew his revolver in the blink of an eye to fight back. At that moment, Bill also stepped out of the darkness and handed a newspaper to Roy. He had found the newspaper while tracking the gang and learned what was happening in Labelle town. Both men sensed that the town was about to face a catastrophe and decided to go back to help. Before leaving, they warned the security team, "Stay here and take care of the horses. We'll come back for them in a few days. Otherwise, this is what will happen to you." With that, Bill shot one of the security team members to make his point. The gang moved at an astonishing speed, arriving at Black Village adjacent to Labelle town overnight. Frank and the Dave brothers knocked on the door to ask for food, using this as a way to lower the villagers' guard, while the other gang members lay in ambush outside, keeping watch. The villagers of Black Village guessed the visitors' identities and sat face to face with Frank at the dinner table, staying on high alert. After a tense conversation, a gunfight broke out. Outnumbered and unprepared, the villagers were defeated. All of them were killed inside the houses. Without their leaders, Black Village was massacred. A young girl escaped through a tunnel and fled to Labelle town with Whitey's help. In Labelle town, the widows lined up to receive guns, the atmosphere heavy with sorrow. According to Mary's plan, they would hide in the town's only brick and iron building and engage in a gunfight with the brutal gang. Outside the town, the gang had massacred all the villagers of Black Village. When Alice went out to look for her son Truckee, she saw the tragic scene and rushed back to Labelle town to warn everyone. Seeing the residents arming themselves for battle, Alice decided to stay and join them. The desert wind kicked up clouds of yellow sand as Frank led the gang into the town. Deputy Whitey appeared, fully armed and ready for battle, but as soon as he stepped out the door, a throwing knife struck him in the chest, and he fell to the ground. The gang members searched the streets but couldn't find the townsfolk. Finally, they gathered in front of the brick and iron building, staring through the windows at the women hiding inside. Mary, who was on the roof, took the first shot, hitting one of the gang members. With that, the gunfight began. Although the residents were numerous, most were women with poor shooting skills. They could only provide suppressive fire and couldn't kill the gang members. The outlaws couldn't take the brick and iron building for the time being, so they set fire to the other wooden houses on the street, using the smoke to obscure the residents' vision. When the residents' firepower weakened, the gang rode their horses into the building. Without suppressive fire, the residents were powerless to resist. Some were killed, others injured. Only Mary and Alice, who were skilled shooters, continued to fight back. Facing more than 20 remaining gang members, they seemed to have already foreseen their deaths. Amidst the yellow sand and gun smoke, Bill and Roy arrived in the town. The two men flanked the gang, one on the left and one on the right. With his horse and fast gun, Roy charged into the crowd like a god of war, joining forces with Bill on the other side. In this critical moment, Bill also rediscovered his former self. His eyesight recovered. He reloaded his gun while pulling the trigger, never missing a shot, restoring the glory of Labelle town sheriff. The two men seemed to have descended from heaven, leaving the gang unable to fight back. The residents inside the building took the opportunity to counterattack, inflicting heavy damage on the gang members in the street. The two men and the women in the brick and iron building cooperated seamlessly, wiping out the entire gang. The surviving women walked out of the building, gazing at the tragic scene on the street with mixed emotions. The elderly, weak, sick, and disabled who had been hiding in the dark stepped onto the streets and embraced their families in disbelief. A town dominated by women had actually defeated a notorious gang. When Roy counted the bodies, he realized the gang leader was missing. He rode out of the town to chase Frank, who, while fleeing, encountered Truckee in the woods. Truckee was kneeling beside a horse, crying he had crashed into a tree while riding downhill, seriously injuring the horse. Frank walked over to the boy and pulled out his gun, handing it to him. "This horse is done for," he said. "Help it end its suffering." The gunshot attracted Roy, who rushed over to stop Frank from approaching Truckee. It was time for the two men to settle their score. Roy and Frank silently walked to an open plain to duel. Frank took off his coat, revealing his missing arm, hoping to intimidate Roy. Both men drew their guns and fired in an instant. Gunshots rang out, and Frank fell to his knees. Roy walked over and delivered the final shot. In Labelle town, the residents gathered at the cemetery to pray for Whitey. No one could speak through their sorrow as a priest who had arrived late officiated the funeral. Outside the town, Roy said goodbye to Alice and her son before leaving the farm. Bill would continue to take care of them from now on. Not long after Roy left, Alice found a bag of money under a fallen fence post on the farm. It was the $50,000 Roy had stolen from the gang earlier. Inside the money bag, there was also a letter Roy had left for Alice. The only words on the page were a few clumsily written ones. "Thank you, I'm a movie enthusiast. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time."